I am Tessa. I am 32 years old. At my sister's engagement party in front of everyone, my mother tapped her champagne glass and said, "Oh, this is my other daughter. She cleans floors for a living." My dad chuckled and added, "Every family has got one." The groom's father, a billionaire real estate mogul, saw his smile vanish. He stared at the thick, jagged scar across my left palm. He stood up slowly and asked, "Could I speak with you outside?" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Buckhead, Atlanta, my parents, Marcus and Vivian, cared about exactly two things: status and appearances. They desperately wanted to belong to the black elite, attending every country club gala, donating money they did not have, and wearing designer labels to mask their mounting debts. My younger sister Camille was their golden child. She was bred to be a socialite, taught to marry into wealth, and trained to smile for the cameras. I was the exact opposite. I preferred boots to high heels and hard work to country club gossip. Because I chose a career path they considered dirty and unglamorous, they treated me like an embarrassing secret. The engagement party was held in the grand ballroom of the Sterling family mansion. The Sterlings were old money white and incredibly powerful in the Atlanta real estate market. Julian Sterling, the groom, was a decent guy who had unfortunately been blinded by Camille's carefully crafted facade. The room was dripping with wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over arrangements of white orchids. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with expensive champagne. I arrived an hour late, wearing a simple but sharp black suit. I had just come straight from a grueling 14-hour shift managing a federal crisis site. I was exhausted, but I showed up because despite everything, they were still my family. The moment I stepped into the ballroom, the lively chatter paused. My mother Vivian was standing on the grand staircase with a microphone in her hand, giving a toast. She was draped in an emerald silk gown that I knew cost more than her monthly mortgage payment. She spotted me near the entrance, and her eyes narrowed with immediate disdain. She did not miss a beat. She tapped her glass, drawing everyone's attention directly to me. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness over the speakers. "This is my other daughter, Tessa. She cleans floors for a living." A ripple of awkward, condescending laughter echoed through the elite crowd. My father Marcus, standing next to Julian's family, swirled the ice in his whiskey glass. He chuckled loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "Every family has got one," he added, shaking his head, as if I were a tragic burden they bravely had to bear. I stood there feeling the weight of hundreds of judgmental eyes on me. I did not flinch. I was used to this. They had spent years telling their wealthy friends that I was a janitor because they were too ashamed to explain the reality of my crisis management career. Camille, glowing in her custom white engagement dress, seized the opportunity to humiliate me further. She glided down the staircase holding a full glass of red wine. As she approached me, she intentionally stumbled, tilting her wrist just enough to send the dark red liquid splashing directly over my polished black shoes. "Oh my gosh," Camille gasped, her tone completely devoid of actual apology. "I am so clumsy." She snatched a thick cloth napkin from a passing waiter's tray and shoved it hard into my chest. "Do what you do best, Tessa. Clean it up." The cruelty was so casual, so practiced, that several guests murmured in amusement. I looked at the napkin, then at my ruined shoes. I did not yell. I did not cry. I calmly raised my left hand to catch the cloth before it hit the floor. As I opened my hand, my palm faced upward under the bright chandelier light. A massive, jagged burn scar stretched from my wrist to my fingers, a permanent reminder of a day that changed my life. At the head table, Richard Sterling, Julian's billionaire father, suddenly went completely rigid. He had been politely smiling at Camille's antics, but the moment the light hit the scar on my hand, his expression shattered. The crystal wine glass slipped from his fingers and crashed onto the marble floor. The sharp sound of shattering glass silenced the entire ballroom instantly. Richard ignored the mess at his feet. He pushed his chair back so hard it tipped over. He marched across the ballroom, his eyes locked entirely on me. The crowd parted for him like the Red Sea. My mother's triumphant smirk faltered as she watched the patriarch of the Sterling Empire approach the daughter she had just publicly degraded. Richard stopped 2 feet away from me. His chest was heaving. He reached out with trembling hands and gently took my scarred left hand in his. He traced the edge of the burn mark with his thumb, his eyes filling with sudden tears. "Could I speak with you outside?" He whispered, his voice cracking with an emotion no one in that room had ever seen from the ruthless real estate mogul. Vivian panicked. Her ultimate social prize was interacting with the family outcast. She abandoned the microphone, rushing down the stairs so fast she nearly tripped over her emerald gown. "Richard," she gasped, inserting herself between us. "Please, she is just a garbage cleaner. She is probably scamming you. Do not pay attention to her. Let us go back to the toast." Richard Sterling turned his head slowly. The vulnerability in his eyes vanished, replaced by an icy, terrifying fury that made my mother physically recoil. His voice boomed through the dead silent room. "Did you just call the savior of the Sterling family garbage?" The word savior hung in the air, thick and heavy, completely paralyzing the ballroom. Vivian's mouth opened and closed like a fish suffocating on dry land. Marcus stepped forward from the crowd, his confident swagger entirely gone, replaced by a nervous, twitchy apprehension. Richard Sterling did not let go of my hand. Instead, he turned his powerful gaze to the hundreds of elite guests, making sure his voice carried to the farthest corners of the room. 8 years ago, Richard announced his tone, demanding absolute attention. During the catastrophic chemical explosion at the Sterling Plaza development, I was trapped under a collapsed reinforced steel door. The air was toxic. The structural integrity of the building was failing. The local fire department pulled back because it was a designated death zone. I was suffocating, waiting to burn alive. He paused, looking back at my mother with absolute disgust. "It was not a janitor who pulled me from that rubble, Vivian. It was the captain of an elite federal hazmat disaster team." She defied evacuation orders, marched into a chemical fire, and used her bare hands to hold up a 1,000-pound burning glass and steel frame just long enough for me to crawl out. The heat melted her protective gear into her skin. He lifted my hand slightly, displaying the jagged scar for the entire room to see. "This scar is the only reason Julian has a father today. This scar is the only reason the Sterling Empire still exists. I spent 8 years looking for the anonymous captain who disappeared into an ambulance before I could get her name. And today I find out she is standing in my own home being ridiculed by her own blood." The silence that followed was absolute. Vivian and Marcus looked like they had been physically struck. The humiliation radiating from them was palpable. This was their action-based backstory, exposed to the elite society they worshipped. They had forced me to hide my occupation because dealing with toxic waste, chemical fires, and federal disaster zones did not fit their pristine country club image. They wanted a doctor. They wanted a corporate lawyer. Because I wore heavy boots and protective suits instead of designer heels, they had deliberately reduced my life-saving, highly technical career to floor cleaning just to save face at their cocktail parties. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide with shock and newfound respect. He looked at Camille, who was standing frozen next to the spilled wine. Camille realized instantly that the spotlight had shifted entirely away from her. The engagement party, her grand moment of triumph and social climbing, was completely hijacked by the sister she despised. Her golden child conditioning kicked in immediately. She needed the attention back, and she needed it now. Camille suddenly clutched her chest, letting out a loud theatrical gasp. She began taking rapid, shallow breaths, swaying on her designer heels. "Julian," she whimpered, her voice trembling. "Julian, I cannot breathe. The room is spinning." She executed a perfect, graceful collapse, falling directly toward her fiancé. Julian caught her, his attention instinctively snapping back to the woman he loved. "Give her some space!" Vivian shrieked, instantly capitalizing on the distraction. "My baby is having a panic attack. This is too much stress for her." Marcus rushed forward, playing the role of the protective father, waving guests away. In the midst of the manufactured chaos, Marcus locked eyes with me. Beneath his mask of paternal concern, his gaze was calculating and greedy. He walked over to me, grabbing my upper arm with a bruising grip. His fingers dug into my suit jacket as he yanked me away from Richard and the surrounding crowd. He dragged me aggressively down a side hallway and shoved me into a dark private coat room, slamming the heavy wooden door behind us to muffle the sounds of the party. The moment we were alone, Marcus dropped the concerned father act completely. His face contorted into an ugly, desperate sneer. "You made the old man emotional," he snarled, pointing a finger directly in my face. "You actually made the great Richard Sterling cry. I cannot believe you hid this from us. Do you have any idea how much power you just handed this family?" I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold clarity. "You mean the family that just called me garbage in front of 300 people?" I asked quietly. Marcus waved his hand dismissively, pacing the small space among the expensive coats. "Do not start with your sensitive nonsense, Tessa. We had to say something. You always show up looking like a mortician. But none of that matters now. We have the ultimate leverage." He stopped pacing and stepped close to me, his breath smelling of expensive whiskey and cheap desperation. "Listen to me very carefully," he demanded, lowering his voice to a menacing whisper. "You are going to walk back out there. You are going to put your arm around the old man, play the humble hero, and tell him how much your sister means to you. You are going to make him wire $500,000 into my personal business account tonight to cover the rest of this wedding." I stared at him, marveling at the sheer audacity. "You want me to extort the man I saved?" "I want you to be useful for once in your life," Marcus spat back. "My real estate firm is drowning. We need that sterling cash to stay afloat until the wedding makes it official. You owe us for raising you. So you will walk out there and secure that money right now, or you are dead to us. You will never set foot in our house again. You will be entirely cut off." He adjusted his tie, thinking he had won, thinking his ultimatum was the ultimate threat to a daughter who just wanted to belong. He reached for the brass doorknob, fully expecting me to follow him out like an obedient, terrified child, ready to do his bidding. He had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply raised my right wrist and tapped the screen of my Apple Watch. A small red recording icon vanished into the background. "I think Julian's family might find this extortion attempt fascinating," I said, my voice completely devoid of the fear he anticipated. "A $500,000 shakedown right here in the coat room of their own estate. The Buckhead Country Club elite would feast on that gossip for a decade." Marcus froze. The vein in his neck throbbed against his stiff white collar. His eyes darted to my watch, then back to my face, realizing his pristine social facade was currently sitting in the digital storage of my device. "Delete that," he hissed, dropping the concerned father act entirely. "You ungrateful little brat, delete that right now." Or what I challenged, stepping closer to him instead of backing away. "You will cut me off. You cut me off 8 years ago when you saw my medical bills from the Sterling Plaza fire and realized I would be a financial liability. You told your friends I moved to Europe because you were embarrassed I was working in hazardous waste recovery to pay off my own debt." Marcus lost whatever fragile control he had left. His face twisted into a mask of pure rage, abandoning the sophisticated patriarch persona he wore for his wealthy friends. He raised his hand, palm open, swinging it toward my face with the full force of his fury. He wanted to put the floor cleaner back in her place. He wanted to remind me of the physical and emotional hierarchy of our household. I never made contact. I caught his wrist mid-air. I did not use my good hand. I used my left hand, the one covered in jagged, thick burn scars. The hand that had held up 1,000 pounds of burning steel to save Richard Sterling. My grip locked around his wrist like a steel vice. I twisted his arm downward just enough to make him gasp in pain, forcing him to look at the very scars he had commanded me to hide. He tried to yank his arm back, but my grip held firm. Years of hauling heavy equipment and breaching collapsed structures had given me a physical strength he could not comprehend. "Do not ever raise your hand to me again," I said, keeping my tone deadly quiet. "You wanted a daughter who cleaned up messes. Congratulations, I am cleaning up right now." I shoved his arm away with enough force to send him stumbling backward into a row of expensive cashmere coats. He hit the wall hard, knocking a row of wooden hangers to the floor. Without a backward glance, I turned the brass knob and stepped out of the suffocating closet, leaving him hyperventilating in the dark. I adjusted my suit jacket, preparing to walk straight out the front doors of the mansion and leave this circus behind me. But as I turned the corner into the main hallway, I stopped dead in my tracks. Julian Sterling was standing right there. He held a crystal glass of ice water presumably fetched for Camille during her theatrical panic attack. The glass was trembling slightly in his grip. His pale blue eyes were wide, darting between the closed coat-room door and my face. He had heard enough. Extortion, Julian said, his voice barely above a whisper. The polished, confident groom looked completely dismantled. He stared at my scarred hand, then back to my eyes. Your father just tried to extort my family for $500,000. I highly suggest you check your father-in-law's credit score before you sign a marriage license, I advised plainly. The elegant facade is running on fumes and unpaid credit cards. Julian shook his head, struggling to process the rapidly crumbling reality of his perfect relationship. But Camille told me, he started, his voice cracking. He looked at me with profound bewilderment. Camille told me you could not be in the bridal party because you were in a court-mandated rehab facility for severe drug addiction. She said your parents were paying a fortune to keep you out of federal prison. A harsh, humorless laugh escaped my throat. A drug addiction. Of course. Vivian and Camille had to invent a spectacular, shameful lie to explain my deliberate absence from the lavish wedding preparations. They painted me as a junkie to Julian's wealthy white family, ensuring the Sterlings would never ask to meet me or invite me to their intimate family dinners. A court-mandated rehab facility, I repeated, letting the absurdity of the lie hang in the air. Julian, I run a federal crisis management company. I have to pass a government-level drug screening and a rigorous background check every 30 days just to maintain my security clearance. I have not taken so much as a basic aspirin since the hospital discharged me 8 years ago because I have to stay incredibly sharp when I walk into disaster zones. Julian looked like the floor had dropped out from under him. The water in his glass sloshed over the rim, dripping onto the expensive Persian rug. She cried, Julian whispered almost to himself. Camille sat on my living room floor and cried for hours about how much she missed her sister, but how she had to protect our future children from your toxic influence. Tears are my sister's primary currency, I replied, stepping past him toward the grand entryway. If you do not believe me, go ahead and ask your fiancée for the exact address of this imaginary clinic. Ask her for the name of my probation officer. Better yet, check your phone. I just sent you the audio file from the coat room. You can listen to Marcus demand $500,000 while you decide if this is the family you want to marry into. Julian pulled his phone from his tuxedo pocket. The screen illuminated his pale face as the notification popped up. He looked sick to his stomach. I walked down the grand corridor, passing priceless artwork and antique vases, eager to breathe real air. Behind me, the muffled sounds of the ballroom grew louder as someone opened the main doors. My mother's shrill voice pierced the hallway. Julian. Julian, darling, where is that water? Camille is feeling so faint. We need you. Vivian rounded the corner, her emerald silk gown swishing loudly. She froze when she saw Julian staring at his phone and me walking toward the exit. The panic in her eyes was instantaneous. She rushed forward, grabbing Julian's arm and trying to physically turn him away from me. Julian, sweetie, do not listen to a word she says, Vivian pleaded, her voice pitched high with desperation. She is having an episode. You know about her condition. She is unwell. We need to get security to escort her back to the facility before she hurts someone. Julian did not move. He looked down at Vivian's perfectly manicured hand resting on his sleeve, and then he looked back up at me. Is that right, Vivian? I said, pausing at the heavy oak front doors. I am having an episode. Yes, Vivian hissed at me, her eyes flashing with venom. Get out of here before you ruin your sister's life out of sheer jealousy. You have always been a sick, jealous girl. I will leave, I said, pushing the heavy door open to the cool night air. But Julian, when Camille miraculously recovers from her panic attack, I strongly recommend you ask her about the $2 million federal loan Marcus took out 5 years ago, the one they are hoping your father will pay off. Vivian screamed for security, but I was already walking down the sprawling driveway. I did not look back. I knew this was just the beginning. They thought they could silence me by painting me as an addict. They thought they could shame me into submission. They were about to learn that you cannot burn a woman who already survived the fire. I pulled my car keys from my pocket and walked down the manicured driveway of the Sterling estate. The cool Atlanta night air felt like a reward after the suffocating toxicity of that ballroom. Before I even reached my vehicle, my phone began to vibrate violently in my hand. It was an incoming call from Julian, but I declined it. I knew exactly what was happening inside those lavish walls. I did not need to be in the room to see the performance. My mother was undoubtedly putting on the show of a lifetime. I could perfectly picture Vivian collapsing into a velvet chair, clutching her chest and squeezing out crocodile tears for the Sterling family. She would frame my entire existence as a tragic, shameful secret they had bravely tried to manage. She would tell Julian that I was deeply unwell, pathologically jealous of Camille, and prone to violent delusions. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a barrage of hostile text messages. They were not from Julian. They were from my sister. I opened the thread and watched the unhinged threats roll in one after another. "You are dead to me," the first message read. "You are a sick, jealous loser who cannot stand to see me happy. Mom told him everything about your psychotic breakdown. You think you can embarrass me in front of my future in-laws. I will find whatever pathetic cleaning business you run, and I will ruin it. I will tell all your dirty little janitor clients that you are a thief and an addict. I will make sure you never scrub another floor in this city again." I sat in the driver's seat of my car, staring at the glowing screen. I simply typed a single sentence. "I look forward to your visit." I put the car in drive and pulled out of the elite Buckhead neighborhood. As I merged onto the highway toward downtown Atlanta, I pressed the voice command button on my steering wheel and called my head of security. I told him to expect visitors the next morning. If my mother and sister wanted to drag my business into the public eye, I was going to give them front row seats to the main event. The next morning, the Atlanta sun reflected blindingly off the glass facade of my corporate headquarters. I stood on the 20th floor, sipping my black coffee and looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows. My desk was made of solid mahogany, and the walls were lined with federal commendations, hazard containment certifications, and framed photos of my elite response teams operating across the country. I turned my attention to the large monitor mounted on my office wall. It displayed a live feed from Instagram. Vivian was broadcasting to her hundreds of country club friends, church members, and local socialites. She had rallied a group of 5 women, all dressed in designer athleisure and oversized sunglasses, sitting in the back of a luxury SUV. "Good morning, everyone," Vivian cooed into her phone camera, adjusting her perfect hair. "I am coming to you live today with a heavy heart. As many of you know, our family has been dealing with a very painful private matter. My oldest daughter has been struggling with severe addiction and delusions. She recently lashed out at her sister's beautiful engagement party, acting violently and making up horrible lies. We have tried so hard to help her, we really have. But today, we have to practice tough love. We are driving to the small janitorial closet she rents in the city. We are going to confront her, demand an apology, and stage a full intervention. Please pray for our family during this trying time." I watched the live stream with a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Vivian was weaponizing her social circle, using public shaming under the guise of Christian intervention. She was absolutely certain she was driving to a rundown strip mall or a dirty warehouse district. She wanted to film herself stepping into a filthy mop closet, holding a designer handkerchief to her nose, looking down at the daughter who dared to challenge her authority. She wanted to broadcast my supposed poverty to prove that leaving the family fold only led to destitution. On the screen, the driver of the SUV followed the GPS coordinates I had intentionally listed on my public business registry. The vehicle turned off the highway and entered the bustling, affluent financial district of downtown Atlanta. The women in the back seat began to look confused. The scenery was not matching the narrative. They were passing high-end corporate law firms, international banks, and luxury hotels. Vivian's confident smile began to falter slightly. She checked the navigation app on her phone, tapping the screen in frustration. "I think the address is wrong," Vivian muttered, her voice losing its sugary performance tone. "This GPS is taking us to the corporate sector. There are no cleaning supplies out here," her friends murmured in agreement, peering out the tinted windows at the towering skyscrapers. The SUV slowed down as the navigation system announced they had reached their destination. The vehicle pulled into a massive circular driveway paved with imported stone. The live stream captured the sheer scale of the property. Immaculate landscaping surrounded a towering 20-story glass and steel high-rise building. Vivian lowered her phone slightly, the camera shaking as she stared up at the building. She instructed the driver to pull over, insisting there had been a mistake. But as the SUV parked right in front of the grand entrance, the camera lens focused directly on the massive chrome and granite sign anchored in the center of a beautiful cascading water feature. The women in the luxury car gasped audibly. Vivian's jaw dropped open. Her face turned a sickly shade of pale gray as she read the enormous gleaming letters, standing proudly in the bright morning sun. Vanguard Recovery, Chief Executive Officer Tessa. The massive chrome letters gleaming in the Atlanta sun reflected the absolute shock paralyzing my mother's face. Vivian stood on the imported stone driveway, her manicured hand trembling so violently that the live stream on her phone blurred into a chaotic mess of pavement and sky. The 5 elite women from her country club piled out of the luxury vehicle behind her, adjusting their oversized designer sunglasses as they craned their necks to take in the sheer magnitude of the 20-story glass skyscraper. This was not the dingy strip mall or hidden janitorial closet they had eagerly anticipated. This was a fortress of corporate power, and my name was engraved right at its foundation. I watched the entire spectacle unfold on the security monitors from my top-floor office before making my way to the lobby. By the time the elevator doors chimed open on the ground floor, Vivian had already pushed her way past the revolving glass doors, her entourage trailing nervously behind her like lost ducklings. She marched into the sleek high-tech atrium, her heels clicking aggressively against the polished marble floors. 2 armed security guards immediately stepped forward, raising their hands to block her path, but Vivian puffed out her chest instantly, reverting to her usual entitled buckhead socialite persona. "Do not touch me," she snapped, swatting at the air near the guard's uniform. "I am the mother of the chief executive officer. I demand to see my daughter this instant. Tell Tessa her family is here for an emergency intervention." I did not let my security team take the brunt of her manufactured outrage. I stepped out from behind the frosted glass partition of the executive mezzanine and began my descent down the grand floating staircase. I was not wearing the exhausted, soot-stained clothes she was used to criticizing. I was dressed in a razor-sharp tailored charcoal power suit flanked by 3 high-ranking federal contractors carrying thick dossiers for our morning briefing. The entire lobby seemed to hold its breath as I walked down the steps. The ambient chatter of receptionists and corporate staff fell entirely silent. Vivian looked up, and for a fleeting second, I saw genuine awe cross her features. She looked at the expensive cut of my suit, the deferential posture of the men surrounding me, and the sprawling empire operating under my command. The narrative she had spun for years, the lie that I was a destitute, drug-addicted floor cleaner, evaporated instantly. Her country club friends exchanged uncomfortable, wide-eyed glances, realizing they had been dragged into a massive humiliation. They were expecting to mock a failure. Instead, they were standing in the lobby of a woman who could buy and sell their husbands' portfolios before lunch. Any normal parent might have felt a shred of remorse for trying to publicly shame their child, but Vivian was not a normal parent. As the reality of my multi-million-dollar crisis management firm sank in the shame in her eyes, was immediately devoured by an overwhelming, ravenous greed. Her posture shifted. The fake concern she had broadcasted to her internet followers completely vanished. She shoved her phone into her designer handbag and squared her shoulders, looking around the lavish lobby like she was already planning how to redecorate it. "Well," Vivian said, her voice echoing loudly in the cavernous space, "it seems you have been holding out on your own flesh and blood. You let your father and me struggle to pay for your sister's wedding while you were sitting on a gold mine. This is exactly the kind of selfish behavior we came here to address today." I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, crossing my arms over my chest. The federal contractors beside me looked highly uncomfortable, but I raised a hand signaling them to stay put. "You brought a mob of your friends to my place of business to broadcast an intervention for a drug addiction I do not have," I replied, keeping my voice dangerously calm and level. "And your first instinct upon realizing I run a federal contracting firm is to complain that I did not bankroll Camille's lavish wedding. That is a new level of delusion even for you." One of the country club women tugged nervously on Vivian's sleeve, whispering that they should leave, but my mother yanked her arm away. She stepped right up to the security line, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Do not you dare speak to me with that disrespectful tone," Vivian commanded, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You think because you have a fancy building and a few men in suits following you around that you are untouchable. I am your mother. You grew up under my roof. You ate the food I provided. Every ounce of success you have belongs to the family that raised you. Security, stand down right now." The guards did not move an inch. They looked to me for instruction, completely ignoring the screaming woman, demanding their obedience. Vivian's face flushed a deep, angry red. She slammed her hand down on the marble reception desk, causing the receptionist to jump in her seat. "You want to play hardball?" Tessa Vivian threatened, a nasty, victorious sneer twisting her features. "Fine, I know the law. Under Georgia family business statutes, Marcus and I are entitled to a significant percentage of any enterprise built by our dependents if we provided the foundational support. We paid for your first hazmat certification. We funded the very start of this little operation. Marcus and I are legally entitled to 50% of this company, and we will take you to court to strip it away from you if you do not show some respect." Her friends gasped, clearly emboldened by her aggressive legal threat. Vivian stood tall, crossing her arms, absolutely convinced she had just checkmated me in my own lobby. She expected me to panic. She expected me to beg her to keep the lawyers out of it. She truly believed her own fabricated history, convincing herself that she had bankrolled the certification I had actually paid for by working consecutive night shifts at a dirty gas station while she bought Camille a new car. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply smiled, a cold, sharp expression that made the triumphant sneer slide right off my mother's face. I turned my head slightly and signaled to my executive assistant David, who was standing quietly near the reception desk. He immediately stepped forward, holding a thick red manila folder. He extended his arm and pressed the heavy file directly against Vivian's chest, forcing her to take it. "Family law," I repeated, my voice echoing with absolute authority. "That is very interesting, Vivian, because if we are going to dive into the legal obligations of this family, we should probably start with federal fraud." Vivian looked down at the red folder, her hands suddenly trembling again. She opened the cover, her eyes scanning the first page. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her looking completely hollowed out as her country club friends peered over her shoulder. "If you want to claim 50% of my company," I continued, taking one slow, deliberate step closer to her. "Then how do you explain the $2 million federal business loan you and Marcus took out 5 years ago by forging my signature?" Vivian stared at the heavy red folder in her trembling hands. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her ash gray under the bright lobby lights. Her eyes darted frantically across the bold federal seals and the undeniable forgery of my signature on the dotted line. For a fraction of a second, raw terror replaced her arrogant entitlement. But true to her nature, Vivian did not surrender. She doubled down. "This is a fabrication," Vivian shrieked, her voice echoing wildly across the marble atrium. She grabbed the pages with both hands and began tearing them into jagged, uneven pieces. "You printed this trash to intimidate me. Marcus and I are respected pillars of the Buckhead community. We would never commit fraud. You are trying to steal our legacy." She threw the shredded documents at my chest, the paper raining down onto the polished floor. I did not even flinch. I just looked at her with pure ice. "That was a photocopy," I said calmly. "The original is sitting in a fireproof safe, waiting for the federal prosecutor. Now get out of my building before I have you arrested for trespassing." Vivian opened her mouth to scream another insult, but my head of security stepped directly into her personal space. He did not say a single word, just pointed a massive gloved hand toward the revolving glass doors. Vivian's country club friends, completely mortified by the public spectacle, practically dragged her out of the lobby. She stumbled backward on her designer heels, shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated venom before the glass doors spun her out onto the bustling Atlanta street. I knew my parents well enough to know they would not retreat to lick their wounds quietly. A cornered animal is the most dangerous, and Marcus and Vivian were about to lose their entire social standing. They immediately went on the offensive. By the time I finished my morning briefing, my phone was blowing up with frantic alerts. Knowing they were facing federal prison, if I handed over the forged loan documents, my parents launched a vicious preemptive media strike. They weaponized their extensive network within the black elite of Atlanta. Marcus called every prominent socialite, every country club board member, and every local politician he had ever bought a drink for. He spun a masterful tragic narrative. He claimed that I was a ruthless, heartless corporate vulture who had become obsessed with power. According to his fabricated story, they had lovingly funded my startup only for me to turn around and attempt to illegally seize their family real estate business to expand my own empire. Vivian played the devastated mother perfectly. She gave an exclusive tearful interview to a prominent local lifestyle blog, claiming she had tried to stage a loving intervention for my severe mental instability, only to be violently thrown out of my office by armed guards. They painted me as a monster trying to imprison her own loving parents out of pure, unadulterated greed. But the absolute worst of the coordinated smear campaign came from my sister. Camille knew her dream wedding to the Sterling billions was hanging by a thread after Julian witnessed Marcus trying to extort him at the engagement party. She needed to change the narrative instantly, and she knew exactly how to manipulate public sympathy. That afternoon, a notification popped up on my desktop monitor. Camille had taken to social media. She posted a video that was rapidly going viral, racking up hundreds of thousands of views in mere hours. In the video, Camille sat on the edge of her pristine white bed, wearing a rumpled designer silk robe, her makeup intentionally smudged to look like she had been crying for days. "Hi, everyone," Camille sniffled into the camera, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "I did not want to make this private family matter public, but my older sister Tessa is trying to destroy my life. She has always been fiercely jealous of me. When she found out I was marrying the love of my life, she completely snapped. Now that she has money, she is using her corporate power to bankrupt our parents. But what is worse is that she is dangerously obsessed with my fiancé. She showed up to our engagement party uninvited and actually tried to seduce Julian. When he rightfully rejected her, she threatened to ruin our upcoming wedding. Please just send prayers for our family today. We are dealing with a deeply disturbed person who needs serious professional help." The comments under the video were an absolute bloodbath. Thousands of strangers were calling me a homewrecker, a psychopath, and a massive disgrace to my family. Camille had masterfully positioned herself as the beautiful, innocent victim of a wealthy, unhinged older sister. She was rallying an entire digital army to destroy my professional reputation before I could expose her lies to the world. The intercom on my mahogany desk buzzed sharply, pulling my attention away from the toxic video. It was my executive assistant. His voice was incredibly tense. "Tessa, the public relations team needs you in the main conference room immediately. We have a massive problem on our hands." I walked down the hall and found my crisis management team pacing nervously around the long table. The lead public relations director slid a digital tablet across the polished wood to me. The viral video was not just a minor family annoyance anymore. It was directly threatening my livelihood and my employees. "The Department of Defense just flagged our pending contract for the coastal cleanup project," the director said, his brow furrowed with intense stress. "They do not like the negative media attention surrounding the chief executive officer. Camille is actively tagging federal oversight agencies in her posts, falsely claiming you are under investigation for massive corporate fraud. If we do not shut this circus down by the end of the week, they are going to award the multi-million-dollar contract to our biggest competitor. Your family is actively sabotaging the company to force your hand." I stared at the tablet, my jaw clenching tightly. Marcus and Vivian were trying to starve me out financially. They wanted to damage my business so severely that I would be forced to negotiate and drop the forgery charges just to save my company. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the smear campaign was serving its true insidious purpose. It was distracting Julian Sterling from the truth. Julian had driven straight to Camille's upscale apartment after watching her dramatic video online. He walked through her front door with a hard, unreadable expression on his handsome face. He was not buying the innocent victim routine anymore. He had heard the extortion attempt in the coat room with his own ears. He had seen the absolute terror on Vivian's face when I threatened to expose their financial ruin. Julian stood in the center of the plush living room holding his car keys tightly in his fist. "We need to talk about what is really going on with your parents," Julian demanded, his voice completely devoid of its usual warmth and affection. "Because none of this adds up at all. Tessa is not a drug addict. Your father tried to shake me down for $500,000. I need the truth right now, Camille, or this entire wedding is officially off." Camille saw her billionaire future slipping right through her manicured fingers. She knew fake tears would not work this time. Julian needed a reason to stay in obligations so profound he could not ethically walk away. She looked at the expensive diamond engagement ring shining on her finger, took a deep, calculated breath, and played her ultimate trump card to lock him in forever. "Julian, please," Camille whispered, her voice trembling perfectly as she placed both hands protectively over her flat stomach. "You cannot leave me right now. I am pregnant." The word pregnant hit Julian like a physical blow to the chest. The car keys slipped from his hand, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor of Camille's luxury apartment. He stared at her flat stomach, his mind racing through a chaotic maze of intense doubt and overwhelming duty. The Sterlings were raised on a strict code of legacy and responsibility. Julian had spent his entire life being groomed to be an honorable patriarch. Camille knew this better than anyone. She had weaponized his deepest moral convictions to trap him. The cold, unreadable expression on his handsome face fractured into pieces. He could not abandon a woman carrying his child even if every instinct in his body was screaming that she was a liar. Camille saw the shift in his eyes and immediately doubled down. She let out a soft stage sob and sank onto the velvet sofa, wrapping her arms around her waist. She claimed the stress of my relentless jealousy was threatening the baby. She spun a frantic narrative insisting that we needed to move the wedding up, that she needed the security of his family to protect their unborn child from my supposed corporate sabotage. Julian did not comfort her. He did not pull her into a joyful embrace like a father-to-be. He simply picked up his keys, his voice hollow and defeated, and told her he would handle the wedding arrangements. The trap was set, and the steel jaws had snapped shut around the Sterling empire. News of the pregnancy spread through the Buckhead elite like wildfire. Marcus and Vivian wasted absolutely zero time exploiting their newly minted leverage. By the very next morning, they bypassed Julian entirely and went straight for the apex predator. They marched into Richard Sterling's sprawling downtown real estate office without an appointment. They were no longer playing the role of embarrassed parents. They were playing the role of the vital gatekeepers to the Sterling bloodline. Marcus slammed his briefcase onto Richard's massive oak desk. He did not ask for a favor. He demanded tribute. Marcus laid out a highly aggressive ultimatum. He claimed that the relentless media circus I had allegedly caused was creating dangerous levels of physical distress for Camille. He insisted that the only way to ensure a healthy, stress-free pregnancy for the Sterling heir was to guarantee the absolute financial security of the maternal grandparents. Vivian sat beside him, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk tissue, playing the distressed grandmother to absolute perfection. Marcus pulled a preliminary contract from his briefcase. He demanded a $10 million corporate guarantee from Richard to bail out his failing real estate firm. He framed it as a necessary merger of family assets to secure the baby's future. He casually threatened that if Richard refused to sign, the intense financial stress might force Camille to seek a quiet, private medical solution to her current condition. It was a vile, thinly veiled threat to terminate the alleged pregnancy. Richard gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. He despised Marcus. He saw right through the extortion. But Richard also valued his legacy above all else. He agreed to review the paperwork and sign it at the rehearsal dinner, buying himself time while legally boxing himself into a corner. While my family paraded through country clubs and corporate offices collecting their ransom, I completely ignored the chaotic digital circus. My public relations team begged me to release a statement countering Camille's viral video, but I refused to engage in a messy internet shouting match. Arguing online is for amateurs. Ideal in absolute destruction. I sat in my private secure conference room at the Vanguard Recovery headquarters. The heavy soundproof doors were locked. The electronic blinds were drawn tight against the afternoon sun. I was not sitting with social media managers. I was surrounded by my elite corporate legal team and a high-end private investigator who usually handled corporate espionage for federal defense contractors. The table was covered in financial printouts, property deeds, and encrypted background checks. My lead attorney, a ruthless woman who specialized in asset seizure, reviewed the latest desperate moves made by Marcus and Vivian. She confirmed they were rapidly taking out massive lines of credit under the assumption that the $10 million sterling guarantee was a done deal. They were spending money. They did not have buying new luxury cars and booking exotic honeymoons entirely high on their own supply of lies. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, watching the digital web of their financial ruin form on the projector screen. They were digging their own graves, but I needed to provide the final shovel. I turned my attention to the private investigator sitting quietly at the end of the long mahogany table. He had been tracking Camille's movements 24 hours a day since the moment she posted that weeping video. I asked him for the medical verification of her sudden miraculous pregnancy. The investigator did not say a word at first. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and slid a silver USB drive across the polished wood table. I caught it with my scarred hand. He leaned forward, tapping a thick file folder in front of him. He informed the room that Camille had not visited a single obstetrician. She had not been to a hospital, a clinic, or a private doctor. There were absolutely no medical records of any pregnancy. However, he continued, his voice perfectly detached and clinical. She has been making very frequent after-hours visits to a local personal trainer at a highly exclusive Buckhead gym. The investigator tapped the folder again. According to my financial surveillance, this personal trainer who makes $50,000 a year just walked into a luxury dealership yesterday morning and bought a brand new Porsche in cash. I looked at the silver drive, a cold smile forming on my face. The trash was taking itself out. My legal team packed up the surveillance files, preparing the devastating dossier that would permanently sever Camille from the Sterling fortune. But before I could even authorize the physical delivery to Richard, my executive assistant walked into the secure conference room and handed me a thick manila envelope sealed with a red court stamp. I opened the flap and pulled out a formal legal summons. Marcus and Vivian were actually suing me, emboldened by their delusional belief that the $10 million sterling guarantee was already a done deal. My parents had filed a frivolous, highly aggressive lawsuit against their own daughter in civil court. They were demanding $50,000 a month in permanent parental support, citing severe emotional distress, public humiliation, and loss of consortium due to my supposedly erratic behavior at the engagement party. It was an absolute masterclass in unbridled audacity. They were literally trying to bleed my corporate accounts dry while simultaneously waiting for their billionaire bailout from Richard. My lead attorney took one look at the ridiculous summons and laughed out loud. She immediately offered to have the entire case dismissed by a judge within 24 hours, citing zero legal standing and blatant harassment. I held up my scarred left hand to stop her. I did not want the case quietly dismissed. I wanted to look them directly in the eye when I finally sprang the trap I had been carefully setting. I told my legal team to arrange a formal mediation session for the very next morning. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for, just not in the way they expected. The mediation took place in the imposing glass-walled boardroom of a highly neutral downtown Atlanta law firm. I arrived exactly 10 minutes early, wearing a sharp navy blue power suit, sitting perfectly still at the head of the long mahogany table. When the heavy double doors finally swung open, Marcus and Vivian strolled inside like returning royalty greeting their loyal subjects. They were absolutely dripping in brand new, heavily logoed designer gear. Vivian carried a bright red Birkin bag that I knew for an absolute fact cost more than my first disaster response vehicle. Marcus wore a custom-tailored Italian suit and a heavy gold Rolex that gleamed obnoxiously under the recessed office lighting. They had clearly maxed out their last remaining shreds of credit to look like untouchable billionaires before the wedding actually took place. They sat down across from me with arrogant, condescending sneers plastered firmly on their faces. "We are extremely glad you finally decided to be reasonable and settle this quietly," Vivian said carelessly, tossing her expensive bag onto the polished wood table. "We know you are absolutely terrified of the bad press ruining your little government contracts. 50,000 a month is a massive bargain for our continued silence, especially considering the enormous embarrassment you caused us in front of Julian's prestigious family. We are actually doing you a massive favor by giving you this incredible opportunity to make things right with your own flesh and blood." I kept my hands folded tightly on the table, maintaining total eye contact without blinking. "You are genuinely suing me for emotional distress," I stated flatly, keeping all emotion completely out of my voice. The neutral mediator, a stern, older gentleman in a gray suit, instructed us to keep the conversation productive and focused solely on the legal demands at hand. Marcus ignored the mediator, completely leaning his entire body forward and jabbing a perfectly manicured finger in my specific direction. "You owe us this money," Tessa, Marcus gloated, his voice dripping with venomous entitlement. "We brought you into this world. We fed you. We put a solid roof over your head. We paid for your first hazmat certification when you decided to throw your bright future away on that dirty, toxic waste garbage. We funded the very foundation of your little company. It is time to pay your dues and show some actual respect to the family that built you from the ground up." I stared at him, marveling at how effortlessly he could rewrite history to fit his own twisted, self-serving narrative. "You did not pay for my certification, Marcus," I replied, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a surgical scalpel. "You took the $5,000 I asked to borrow for my safety training, and you used it to upgrade Camille's flight to Paris for her summer vacation. I worked consecutive night shifts, scrubbing bathrooms at a gas station on Interstate 20 to pay for my own certification. I ate leftover hot dogs from the roller grill just to survive the month. You never gave me a single dime of support." Vivian rolled her eyes dramatically, waving her hand dismissively, as if my painful struggles were a boring television show she was forced to watch. "Oh, please stop with the dramatic victim routine, Tessa. It is utterly exhausting. We gave you character. We gave you the unbreakable drive to succeed. If we had not pushed you out of the nest and forced you to work hard, you would not be sitting in that fancy high-rise office today. You owe us full compensation for the foundational support of your entire career. Now just sign the paperwork so we can get back to planning a real wedding for a daughter who actually makes us proud." The mediator cleared his throat loudly, breaking the heavy tension, and pushed the printed settlement agreement across the mahogany table toward me. It boldly outlined the $50,000 monthly cash transfer my parents were demanding for the rest of their natural lives. Marcus pulled a heavy gold-plated pen from his breast pocket and tossed it onto the document with a smug, victorious clatter. He sat back in his leather chair, crossing his arms confidently, waiting for me to surrender. He fully believed I was terrified of a public trial, exposing my company to the scrutiny of the Atlanta elite. He thought the intense media smear campaign had worked, and that I was capitulating to save my federal contracts from any further public backlash. I did not touch the gold pen. I slowly reached into my own leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy leather-bound folder. I placed it directly on top of their ridiculous settlement demand, covering the signature line entirely. I looked at Marcus, then at Vivian, letting the heavy silence stretch until their arrogant smiles began to falter into genuine creeping confusion. They clearly had absolutely no idea what was hidden inside the dark folder sitting right in front of them. "I will gladly sign a document taking over your entire list of financial obligations," I said smoothly, leaning forward and resting my forearms firmly on the mahogany table while looking them dead in the eye. "In fact, I already have." My lead attorney did not miss a beat. She unclasped the thick leather-bound folder and slid a massive stack of heavy banking deeds directly across the polished mahogany table. The crisp white pages fanned out perfectly, stopping right at the edge of Marcus's fingertips. He looked down at the documents, his arrogant sneer faltering as his eyes caught the familiar, terrifying logos of the various financial institutions he had been desperately dodging for the past 18 months. "What is this garbage?" Marcus demanded, his voice pitching slightly higher as he snatched the top document from the pile. You think you can throw some fake bank statements at me and scare me out of my rightful $50,000 a month? I leaned back in my chair, watching the exact moment his brain tried to process the heavy red legal stamps pressing down on the paper. Those are not bank statements, Marcus, I said, keeping my tone entirely conversational. Those are the original deeds, promissory notes, and penalty contracts for every single piece of toxic debt you and Vivian currently possess. I did not agree to pay you an allowance today. Instead, I leveraged a fraction of Vanguard's corporate capital to legally purchase your debt directly from your creditors on the secondary market. Vivian blinked rapidly, her heavy false eyelashes fluttering as she struggled to comprehend the financial mechanics of my move. She looked from the papers to my face, a sudden, sickeningly sweet smile breaking through her confusion. You paid them off, Vivian gasped, clutching her bright red designer handbag to her chest. Oh, Tessa, you actually paid off our debts. I knew you would come to your senses. I knew you would realize that family comes first. You saved the Buckhead house. My attorney let out a short, sharp laugh, but quickly covered her mouth. I did not smile. I looked at my mother with absolute freezing clarity. I did not pay them off, Vivian, I corrected her, my voice dropping an octave. I bought them. Every single one. The banks were absolutely thrilled to offload your toxic defaulted accounts for pennies on the dollar. I now own the third mortgage you secretly took out on the Buckhead estate. I own the massive high-interest credit lines you maxed out to pay for Camille's lavish floral arrangements and catering deposits. I own the fraudulent, unsecured business loans you funneled into Marcus's failing real estate firm just to keep up appearances at the country club. The sweet smile melted off Vivian's face, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She dropped her designer bag onto the floor. The heavy thud echoed in the silent boardroom. You cannot do that, Marcus shouted, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table so hard the water glasses rattled. It is illegal. You cannot just buy our debt without our permission. It is perfectly legal, my attorney interjected smoothly, tapping a freshly manicured finger against the stack of papers. Debt is bought and sold every single day in the corporate sector. Vanguard Recovery simply created a subsidiary holdings firm to acquire distressed assets. Your accounts were severely distressed, Marcus. You have not made a single mortgage payment in 7 months. Marcus began to sweat. Small beads of moisture formed on his forehead, ruining his polished patriarch facade. He scrambled to find a way out, his mind desperately clinging to the one lifeline he thought he still had. It does not matter, Marcus sneered, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. It does not matter what you bought. Richard Sterling is signing the $10 million business guarantee tomorrow night at the rehearsal dinner. He already gave me his word. The moment his ink hits that paper, I will have the capital to pay off every single cent of this debt. I will write you a check on Monday morning, and then I am going to sue you for extreme financial harassment. I looked at him, marveling at his blind, arrogant faith in a man who actively despised him. But today is Thursday, Marcus, I said softly. I placed both of my hands flat on the table and slowly stood up. The power dynamic in the room shifted instantly. I was no longer looking up at the towering, authoritative figures who had tormented my childhood. I was looking down at two bankrupt, desperate frauds who had built a kingdom on quicksand. I am no longer your estranged daughter, I stated, locking my eyes directly onto his. I am your sole primary creditor. You owe me exactly $8.5 million. The terms of your original loan state that upon transfer of ownership, the creditor may demand payment in full if the accounts are severely delinquent. You are entirely in default. I paused, letting the crushing weight of the numbers suffocate them. And because you cannot produce $8.5 million today? I continued, my voice echoing with finality. I am initiating immediate foreclosure on your Buckhead estate. The words struck the table like a physical bomb. The Buckhead estate was their entire identity. It was their entry ticket into the black elite of Atlanta. It was the physical proof they used to convince the Sterling family they were wealthy equals. Without that house, they were absolutely nothing. Vivian snapped. The polished country club socialite vanished entirely, replaced by a feral, cornered animal. She let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream that ripped through the quiet legal offices. "You ungrateful evil witch!" Vivian shrieked at the top of her lungs. She lunged violently across the wide mahogany table. Her hands curled into claws, swiping desperately toward my face, knocking over water pitchers and sending the heavy legal documents flying into the air. She wanted to physically tear me apart for destroying her fragile illusion of wealth. I did not even take a step back. Before Vivian could reach halfway across the wood, my two private security contractors moved with lightning speed. They intercepted her mid-lunge, grabbing her arms firmly and forcing her backward. They pinned her securely into her expensive leather chair, completely neutralizing her attack in seconds. Vivian thrashed against their grip, sobbing hysterically, her perfect hair falling wildly around her face. Marcus sat frozen beside her, staring blankly at the scattered foreclosure notices, completely paralyzed by the realization that his empire was gone. I calmly looked down at my sleeves and adjusted my crisp white cuffs. I picked up my briefcase from the floor and turned toward the heavy double doors. "I will see you at the eviction," I said without looking back. I walked out of the boardroom, the heavy doors closing firmly behind me, leaving my parents trapped inside with their financial ruin and the echoing sounds of Vivian's uncontrollable screaming. The heavy oak doors of the law firm clicked shut behind me, severing the sound of my mother's hysterical screaming. I did not linger in the hallway to bask in my victory. I simply adjusted my briefcase and stepped into the private elevator, leaving Marcus and Vivian to choke on the reality of their massive, inescapable debt. They were drowning, and for the first time in my life, I was not going to throw them a life preserver. Upstairs, the illusion of their billionaire status shattered faster than they could process. Marcus dragged Vivian out of the boardroom by her elbow, his face slick with cold sweat. They stumbled down to the street level, frantically trying to convince each other that my move was a temporary legal trick. Vivian, desperate to soothe her shattered nerves and project an aura of untouchable wealth, demanded Marcus drive them straight to Phipps Plaza. She needed a new designer gown for the rehearsal dinner tomorrow night. She needed to walk into the Sterling family event looking like absolute royalty, ignoring the fact that she no longer owned the roof over her head. They swept into an exclusive European boutique, masking their panic with arrogant demands. Vivian piled silk dresses and imported shoes onto the pristine glass counter, treating the sales associates like servants. Marcus pulled out his black titanium credit card with a haughty flick of his wrist. He handed it to the cashier, expecting the usual deferential nod. Instead, the machine beeped a sharp, unforgiving red tone. "Declined." Marcus snatched the card back, his face flushing dark red. He loudly blamed a bank error and pulled out his secondary platinum card. "Declined again." Vivian shoved him aside, slamming her own premium cards onto the glass. One by one, the machine rejected every single piece of plastic they owned. The sales associates fell silent, exchanging knowing, pitiful glances. The whisper of declined cards in Buckhead spreads faster than a wildfire. Vivian snatched her empty designer handbag, her face burning with humiliation, and practically ran out of the boutique. Marcus chased after her, leaving thousands of dollars worth of clothes abandoned on the counter. Sitting in the suffocating silence of their leased luxury vehicle, the gravity of their situation finally crushed them. I had not just bought their mortgages. I had initiated a total freeze on their entire financial ecosystem. They had zero liquidity. They could not even buy a tank of gas, let alone a $10,000 dress. Marcus slammed his fists against the steering wheel, screaming vicious curses. Vivian wept, her perfect makeup running down her face. But true to their toxic nature, instead of reflecting on their actions, they immediately began plotting their deception. Marcus grabbed Vivian by the shoulders, shaking her slightly to snap her out of her hysteria. He insisted they only needed to survive the next 24 hours. Tomorrow night was the rehearsal dinner. Richard Sterling was bringing the finalized $10 million business guarantee for Marcus to sign. Marcus laid out his delusional strategy. If they could just keep up the facade for one more night, if they could just get Richard's signature on that massive corporate guarantee, Marcus could take that contract straight to a private equity lender. He could secure a massive bridge loan against the Sterling name, pay off the $8.5 million he owed me, and force me to release the foreclosure on the Buckhead estate. They agreed to keep their financial ruin an absolute secret, They would not tell Camille, knowing her theatrical temperament would inevitably ruin the performance in front of Julian. They would walk into the rehearsal dinner smiling, pretending they were the powerful equals the Sterlings believed them to be. While they sat in their car spinning a web of desperate lies, I sat at my expansive mahogany desk on the top floor of Vanguard Recovery. The city of Atlanta hummed quietly below my floor-to-ceiling windows, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. I opened the thick black dossier my private investigator had delivered earlier that morning. The evidence inside was meticulously organized, perfectly documented, and completely damning. I laid the high-resolution surveillance photographs out across my desk. There was Camille wearing a trench coat and oversized sunglasses standing in the back alley of an exclusive fitness club at 2 in the morning. She was handing a thick, bulging envelope of cash to a muscular man identified as Mike, her personal trainer. The next graph showed Mike walking into a high-end car dealership the very next day, purchasing a brand new Porsche in straight cash. I flipped to the medical background check. My investigator had hacked through layers of secure scheduling systems. Camille had not booked a single appointment with an obstetrician. She had no medical records, no blood tests, and absolutely no ultrasounds on file anywhere in the state of Georgia. The pregnancy was a spectacular, desperate fabrication. She was using a fake baby to trap Julian into marriage and secure the $10 million bailout for our parents. They were treating the Sterling family like a massive, endless ATM, completely underestimating the intelligence of the man who built that empire. Richard Sterling was a ruthless, brilliant titan of real estate. He demanded absolute loyalty and ruthlessly destroyed anyone who attempted to deceive him. He respected me because I had saved his life without asking for a single dime in return. My family was about to rob him blind, using his honorable son as the ultimate collateral. I gathered the photographs, the bank statements, and the background checks, sliding them back into the black dossier. I did not need to scream, cry, or post frantic videos on social media to defend my name. I had the truth printed in black and white. I picked up my secure private office phone and dialed a number that bypassed every corporate secretary and personal assistant in the Sterling Empire. It rang exactly twice before a deep, authoritative voice answered the line. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm, steady, and sharp. "It is Tessa. It is time we clean up some toxic waste before it infects your family." The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Vanguard office. My private line chimed with an urgent voicemail notification. I tapped the speaker button and leaned back in my leather chair. Vivian's voice flooded the quiet room. Her tone was shrill, hysterical, and laced with calculated panic. "Tessa, you malicious, ungrateful monster!" she screamed into the receiver, her breath hitching in a performance worthy of an award. "If you execute that foreclosure today, I swear to God I will drive straight to the country club tonight. I will walk right into the middle of the rehearsal dinner, and I will kill myself right in front of Richard Sterling and his entire billionaire family. You will be a murderer. The media will know you drove your own mother to suicide." I did not blink. I did not reach for the phone to call emergency services. I just took a slow sip of my black coffee. It was the exact same script, almost word for word. 18 years ago, I received a full academic scholarship to an elite engineering program in Massachusetts. It was my ticket out. But the day I packed my bags, Vivian locked herself in our guest bathroom with a bottle of sleeping pills, screaming that my abandonment was driving her to an early grave. I gave up my scholarship that day. I stayed in Atlanta working grueling night shifts to help Marcus keep his struggling real estate business afloat. I bought the lie because I was young and terrified of being responsible for my mother's death. Now, sitting in the empire I built with my own two hands, I simply tapped the screen and deleted the message. Let her bring her theatrical threats to the Sterlings. I had already warned Richard exactly what kind of performance to expect. Across town, in the private velvet-lined banquet hall of Atlanta's most exclusive French restaurant, my sister was completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging down on our parents. Camille strutted through the dining room in a custom white silk pantsuit, pointing aggressively at the waitstaff. She was already wearing the Sterling name like a crown, barking orders at the catering director because the centerpieces were cream instead of pure ivory. "Do you have any idea who my future father-in-law is?" Camille shrieked, snapping her manicured fingers in the face of a terrified waitress. If these tables are not reset with imported crystal in the next 10 minutes, I will have this entire restaurant shut down. She was playing the role of the untouchable matriarch, completely unaware that the designer suit she was wearing had been purchased on a credit card that was currently frozen by my acquisitions team. She believed her billionaire bailout was only hours away. Julian Sterling stepped into the banquet hall, his posture rigid and tense. He did not look at the expensive floral arrangements or the imported crystal. He was staring directly at Camille's diamond-encrusted smartphone resting on the edge of the mahogany bar. The screen had just lit up with a bright, undeniable notification. The message was from a contact saved as PT Mike. It read, "Bank transfer cleared for the Porsche. When do I get the rest of my cash, gorgeous?" Julian picked up the phone. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles leaped under his skin. He walked over to Camille, grabbing her gently but firmly by the elbow, and steered her away from the catering staff into a secluded, dimly lit hallway near the wine cellar. "Who is Mike?" Julian asked, his voice dangerously low and steady. Camille's arrogant sneer vanished instantly. She looked at the illuminated screen in his hand, and the blood rapidly drained from her face. She tried to snatch the phone back, but Julian held it completely out of her reach. "Julian, it is just my personal trainer." Camille stammered, her eyes darting frantically as she scrambled for an alibi. "I was helping him out with a personal loan. You know how generous my parents are. We love giving back to the community." Julian did not flinch. "Your parents' credit cards were declined at 3 different luxury boutiques yesterday, Camille. The country club manager called my father this morning because Marcus's membership check bounced. They are completely broke. So I will ask you one more time. Why are you wiring massive amounts of cash to a personal trainer the day before our wedding?" Cornered and out of lies, Camille resorted to her ultimate unbreakable weapon. She did not try to explain the finances. She let out a sharp, agonizing gasp, her knees buckling slightly as she leaned heavily against the oak-paneled wall. She wrapped both hands protectively around her perfectly flat stomach. Tears pooled in her eyes, spilling over her dramatic eyelashes in a masterful display of maternal terror. "Julian, please," she whimpered, her voice cracking with manufactured pain. "Are you really interrogating me over a fitness instructor right now? Are you seriously stressing our baby out the night before our wedding?" "I am cramping, Julian. The doctor said any severe stress could cause a miscarriage." The mention of the baby hit Julian like a physical blow. The honorable, deeply ingrained Sterling duty overrode his blazing suspicions. He could not risk the health of his unborn child over a suspicious text message. He slowly lowered the phone, stepping back to give her space. He did not apologize, and he did not pull her into a comforting embrace. He simply turned his back and walked out of the hallway, heading back into the main dining room. Camille let out a quiet breath of relief, thinking she had successfully manipulated her way out of the corner once again. She wiped her tears, smiling as she smoothed the wrinkles from her silk jacket. But as Julian walked away, his face was carved from solid ice. He pulled his own phone from his pocket and stared at the dark screen. The doubt in his mind was no longer a fleeting thought to be brushed aside. It was a solid wall of ice, and he was fully prepared to watch it all shatter tonight. Julian stepped back into the opulent, dimly lit private dining room of the Michelin-starred restaurant. Crystal chandeliers hung low over long tables draped in heavy white linen. The room buzzed with the quiet, confident hum of extreme wealth. The Sterling family and their elite guests sat relaxed, sipping vintage Bordeaux and exchanging polite laughter. On the opposite side of the room, the contrast was glaringly obvious. Marcus and Vivian sat stiffly in their unpaid designer clothes. Marcus was sweating right through his custom Italian silk suit. His eyes darted compulsively toward the head table where Richard Sterling presided over the room. Right next to Richard's plate, resting beneath a crystal water goblet, was the preliminary contract for the $10 million business guarantee. It was the only thing keeping Marcus and Vivian out of federal prison and off the streets. They just needed Richard to pick up his gold pen. Marcus tapped his foot frantically against the imported rug, his anxiety radiating like a physical heat wave. He kept checking his watch, calculating how many hours he had left before I seized his estate. Vivian clutched her red luxury bag in her lap, her knuckles white, her painted smile looking more like a grimace of physical pain. She kept checking the grand mahogany doors, terrified that her creditors might somehow breach the restaurant to repossess her jewelry. She was absolutely terrified of losing her elite social standing. The heavy oak doors at the entrance of the private banquet hall swung open. The maitre d' stepped aside, bowing slightly. I walked into the room. I did not wear a ball gown or attempt to match the suffocating glamour of the event. I wore a tailored midnight blue power suit, a stark reminder that I was here on business, not for a family reunion. My presence was a deliberate disruption of their carefully curated fantasy. The ambient chatter in the restaurant died instantly. The clinking of silver forks against fine china ceased. Dozens of eyes turned toward the entrance. Vivian spotted me first. The blood completely drained from her face, leaving her ash gray. Her jaw dropped and she gripped Marcus' forearm so hard her acrylic nails likely dug into his skin. The panic in her eyes was absolute. She thought I was here to execute the foreclosure in front of the Buckhead elite. She immediately began to shake, her chest heaving as she prepared to launch into her trademark victim routine, ready to scream that her deranged daughter was stalking her. She needed to control the narrative before I could speak a single word about their massive debt. Before Vivian could unleash her theatrical tears, Camille burst into the dining room from the hallway. She had just recovered from her fake cramping episode with Julian and was rushing back to secure her billionaire prize. She froze the second she saw me standing near the head table. Camille knew her entire empire of lies was resting on a razor-thin edge. If I opened my mouth, her fake pregnancy and her secret payments to a personal trainer would be exposed to the wealthiest family in Georgia. She had to seize control of the situation immediately. She thrust her shoulders back, marched across the plush carpet, and threw both hands protectively over her perfectly flat stomach. "How dare you show up here?" Camille shrieked, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. The sheer volume made several of Julian's relatives flinch in surprise. She pointed an accusing finger at my face, stepping closer to ensure every guest in the room was watching her performance. "After everything you have done to ruin my baby future, you have the audacity to stalk me at my own rehearsal dinner. You are sick. You are a jealous, psychotic stalker, and you need to leave right now. You are trying to destroy the happiest moment of my life because you are a miserable, lonely failure who cannot stand to see anyone else succeed." Vivian found her footing, instantly leaping out of her chair to flank her golden child. She pointed frantically at the restaurant security guard standing near the entrance. "Richard," Vivian pleaded, her voice pitched in a desperate, trembling whine that she had perfected over decades of manipulation. "Richard, please have your security throw her out into the street. She is dangerously unstable. She has been harassing our family for weeks out of pure jealousy. We cannot let her violent outbursts endanger the life of your future grandchild. She is obsessed with ruining us. Please get her out of here before she hurts someone. We simply cannot have this kind of toxic energy around a pregnant woman." Julian stood silently near the bar. He did not rush forward to protect Camille. He did not put a comforting arm around her shoulders. He simply watched the spectacle unfold, his blue eyes cold and calculating, waiting for the inevitable impact. He knew exactly what kind of liars he was dealing with now. He looked at Camille, hands resting on her stomach, and a wave of pure disgust washed over his features. Richard Sterling did not summon his security team. He did not look alarmed, and he certainly did not look at me with disgust. The billionaire patriarch slowly leaned back in his plush leather chair. He picked up his crystal glass of red wine, swirling the dark liquid thoughtfully. He took a long, deliberate sip, letting the incredibly tense and chaotic silence stretch across the entire room. He lowered the glass and set it precisely next to the unsigned $10 million contract. "No one is throwing her out into the street tonight," Richard said, his deep voice carrying absolute, unquestionable authority that immediately silenced the entire room. He stared directly at Vivian and Marcus, his expression utterly cold and unforgiving. "I personally invited her. She is the true guest of honor, and she has every single right to be standing right here with us in this room tonight." The heavy silence following Richard Sterling declaring me his guest of honor was absolute. Vivian sank into her velvet chair, her face going slack as her eyes darted between us in pure panic. Camille stood frozen, clutching her stomach. The most powerful man in Atlanta was publicly elevating me. Marcus was a cornered animal. He knew his real estate empire was being foreclosed on by my legal team, and his credit cards were frozen. The only thing preventing his financial annihilation was the $10 million business guarantee resting in front of Richard. Marcus ignored the power shift, relying on his arrogance to trap Richard. Marcus cleared his throat forcefully, clapping his hands to break the heavy tension. He snatched a champagne flute from a passing waiter and marched directly to the head table. "Well," Marcus boomed, his voice dripping with false joviality. "Every family has misunderstandings, but tonight is about legacy." He stepped up to Richard, hovering with a desperate smile. Marcus pulled a gold pen from his pocket, deliberately placing it directly on top of the unsigned contract, resting under Richard's glass. "I would like to propose a toast," Marcus announced to the bewildered crowd, "to the union of Camille and Julian, merging two powerful Atlanta dynasties. We are combining our strength and our massive corporate empires. This contract represents the unbreakable bond between the Sterling family and our own. Drink up, everyone. Let us celebrate this $10 million partnership and the beautiful grandchild who will carry our shared legacy forward. Sign the paper, Richard. Let us make this dynasty official." Marcus held his glass high, sweating profusely. He was trying to socially engineer Richard into signing away $10 million by making a public spectacle. Guests tentatively raised their glasses, completely unaware they were participating in a high-stakes extortion attempt. Julian did not raise his glass. He stood near the bar, his eyes locked on Camille, his face carved from solid ice. Richard did not reach for the pen. He simply sat back, folding his hands, his expression completely unreadable. I stepped forward, the heels of my power suit clicking sharply against the floor. I picked up a glass of sparkling water and faced the entire room. "I also have a toast," I said, my voice cutting through the applause like a blade. Vivian shot up from her chair, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "Do not let her speak," Vivian shrieked, entirely abandoning her refined persona. "She is having a psychiatric episode. She is going to ruin everything out of pure spite. Marcus, make her shut her mouth right now." Marcus took a threatening step toward me, but Richard raised a single commanding hand. The absolute authority in his tone stopped my father dead in his tracks. "Let her speak," Richard ordered. I smiled coldly at my parents, holding my glass high. "To truth, transparency, and family planning," I announced clearly. "Because if we are going to merge two powerful empires for the sake of a child, we should make sure everyone has all the facts about the upcoming arrival." I reached into the pocket of my blazer and pulled out a small black remote control. My crisis management team had been in the restaurant hours before the guests arrived, syncing my device to the audiovisual system integrated into the banquet hall walls. I pressed the center button without a single second of hesitation. The romantic ambient music instantly cut off. A massive motorized projector screen descended smoothly from the ceiling right behind the head table, completely dwarfing the elaborate floral arrangements. Camille let out a high-pitched gasp. She lunged forward desperately, trying to grab the remote from my hand, but Julian stepped directly into her path, blocking her with his broad shoulders. He just stared her down with an intensity that made her shrink backward in absolute terror. The guests leaned forward, expecting a sweet slideshow of the happy couple. They expected romantic vacation snapshots and smiling engagement portraits. Instead, the massive screen flickered to life with security footage. The timestamp indicated the recording was from exactly 3 days ago. The location was a dimly lit back office of a private women's health clinic in Buckhead. The entire dining room collectively gasped. On the massive screen, Camille was standing next to a medical examination table wearing designer activewear. She looked perfectly healthy. There was no baby bump. There was no medical emergency. A woman in a nurse uniform stood facing her. Camille reached into her expensive leather handbag, pulled out a remarkably thick envelope stuffed with $100 bills, and shoved it aggressively into the nurse's hands. The audio kicked in, echoing loudly through the banquet hall speakers. "Make sure the name on the sonogram printout matches my identification exactly," Camille commanded on the video, her voice dripping with extreme arrogance. "My fiancé needs to see the absolute proof of a 6-week pregnancy tonight. If you mess up the dates, I will have your medical license revoked." The nurse nodded nervously, taking the bribe and handing Camille a glossy ultrasound photograph of a child that did not exist. The footage did not end there. A tall, heavily muscled man stepped into the frame from the shadows of the clinic office. It was Mike, her personal trainer. He wrapped his massive arms around Camille's waist from behind, pulling her flush against his chest. He buried his face in her neck, kissing her deeply, while she giggled and admired the fake ultrasound picture. "Do not worry, babe," Mike said on the video, his deep voice filling the silent restaurant. "Once you marry the billionaire Boy Scout, his daddy's money will pay off my new Porsche. We just have to keep the fake baby routine going until the ink dries on the marriage certificate." Camille turned her head and kissed him passionately on the mouth. The video froze on that exact frame. The expensive trap had officially snapped shut on her instead. The final frame of the security footage burned brightly on the massive drop-down screen. Camille was locked in a passionate embrace with her personal trainer, holding a fraudulent ultrasound photo. The audio from the hidden clinic camera echoed off the vaulted ceilings of the Michelin-starred restaurant, bouncing between the crystal chandeliers and the imported mahogany walls. "Once I marry the billionaire Boy Scout, his daddy's money will pay off my new Porsche. We just have to keep the fake baby routine going until the ink dries on the marriage certificate." The restaurant went entirely terrifyingly silent. The classical string quartet in the corner stopped playing mid-measure. Elite guests, dressed in custom tuxedos and couture gowns, sat completely paralyzed. Waitstaff froze with silver trays hovering in the air. The absolute humiliation of the moment was so thick it felt suffocating. In the Buckhead high society, reputation is currency. Camille had just bankrupted her social standing in less than 60 seconds. Vivian clutched her chest, her emerald silk gown rustling loudly in the quiet room. She looked like she was going to physically vomit. The perfect, pristine matriarch image she had meticulously crafted over decades was disintegrating in real time. Camille broke the silence with a shrill, ear-piercing scream. She lunged away from the head table, pointing a manicured finger violently in my direction. "It is a fake!" Camille shrieked, her voice cracking with pure desperation. Her perfectly styled hair whipped around her face as she looked frantically at the guests, trying to salvage the unsalvageable. "Do not look at that screen. Tessa runs a tech company. She hired a team of federal hackers to make a deepfake video. It is artificial intelligence. She is framing me because she is a psychotic, jealous spinster who wants to ruin my life." She rushed toward Julian, her hands outstretched, trying to grab his tuxedo jacket. "Julian, baby, please look at me," she begged, tears streaming down her face. Her performance was Oscar-worthy, but the audience had already seen behind the curtain. "You know me, Julian. I am carrying your child. Our baby is in my stomach right now. You cannot believe this highly edited garbage." Julian did not step back. He did not yell. He did not show a single ounce of anger, which was infinitely more terrifying than if he had started throwing glasses. The honorable, polished heir to the Sterling real estate empire stood up very slowly. His face was a mask of absolute chilling apathy. He looked down at Camille's hands, desperately clutching her flat stomach, playing the maternal victim to the bitter end. Then he raised his pale blue eyes and looked directly into her face. "You wore the exact same designer activewear yesterday morning," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerously calm decibel that forced the entire room to lean in. "You told me you were going to a private prenatal yoga session, but you smelled like cheap men's cologne when you came home. I noticed it. I just refused to believe the woman carrying my legacy would be so exceptionally cheap." Camille gasped, stepping backward as if he had physically struck her. "Julian, no, I swear on my life." "Do not swear on a life that does not exist." Julian interrupted, his tone slicing through her lies like a surgical scalpel. Julian reached down and firmly grasped Camille's left hand. He did not do it with affection. He held her wrist with an iron grip, lifted her hand into the light of the chandelier, and smoothly slid the flawless multi-million-dollar diamond engagement ring right off her finger. Camille let out a strangled, pathetic cry as the heavy platinum band left her skin. That ring was her ticket to the Billionaire Boys Club. It was her shield against the massive, suffocating debt her parents had accumulated. Julian held the massive diamond between his thumb and forefinger. He turned to the table, holding the ring directly over his half-full crystal glass of expensive red wine. "We are done," Julian stated with absolute unwavering finality. He opened his fingers. The heavy diamond plummeted into the dark red liquid with a definitive splash, sinking straight to the bottom of the crystal glass. The symbolism was incredibly clear. She was entirely dead to him. She was nothing but disdain on his family's pristine legacy. Camille collapsed to her knees, right there on the imported restaurant rug. The golden child of the Buckhead elite. The woman who had spent her entire life mocking my work boots and calloused hands was now kneeling on the floor in her custom white silk pantsuit, sobbing uncontrollably. She begged Vivian to help her. She begged Marcus to fix it. But the most revealing, devastating moment of the entire night did not come from Camille's breakdown. It came from our father. Marcus did not rush to his youngest daughter's side. He did not wrap a protective arm around the golden child who was currently hyperventilating on the floor. Marcus did not care about Camille's destroyed relationship, her shattered heart, or her utter public humiliation. Marcus only cared about one thing: financial survival. Marcus forcefully slammed both of his heavy hands down onto the dining table, rattling the expensive silverware and sending a shockwave through the room. His face was flushed dark red, slick with anxious sweat. He completely ignored Camille sobbing at his feet and turned his aggressive, wild eyes directly toward the patriarch of the Sterling family. "The wedding does not matter," Marcus bellowed, his voice echoing with sheer, unadulterated greed and desperation. The elite guests gasped in unison. Vivian froze, staring at her husband in absolute horror as he openly discarded their favorite daughter to save his own skin. "I do not care if Julian calls off the engagement," Marcus continued, pointing a shaking finger directly at Richard Sterling. "You already signed the preliminary intent for the $10 million business guarantee, Richard. We signed it 30 minutes ago before this dinner officially started. You put your ink on the dotted line." Marcus reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the folded, heavy parchment document, waving it in the air like a victorious gladiator. "It does not matter what my daughter did with her personal trainer. It does not matter if the baby is real or fake. This is a binding corporate document. We are legally protected. You owe my real estate firm $10 million. Richard and I will drag the Sterling name through every civil court in the state of Georgia if you try to back out now." I stood near the projector screen watching my father burn his last remaining shred of dignity to the ground. He had just proven to the wealthiest people in the city that he was willing to sell his own daughter's trauma for a corporate bailout. He thought he had outsmarted a billionaire. He thought he had secured his financial salvation. He had absolutely no idea that Richard Sterling was already holding a loaded gun. Marcus stood at the head table, breathing heavily, entirely convinced his aggressive public extortion had just checkmated the Sterling empire. He held his copy of the $10 million preliminary business guarantee like a golden ticket, an arrogant, victorious sneer plastered across his sweating face. He believed he had cornered Richard. He believed the Sterling family's obsession with their pristine social legacy would force them to pay any ransom just to avoid a messy public scandal. Richard Sterling did not look cornered. He did not look intimidated. The billionaire patriarch slowly stood up from his plush leather chair, his imposing frame commanding the absolute silence of the room. He reached into the breast pocket of his custom-tailored tuxedo and smoothly pulled out the original signed copy of the exact same preliminary contract. "I honor my debts," Marcus Richard said, his deep voice carrying a terrifying, lethal calm that sent an immediate shiver down Vivian's spine. "I have built my entire empire on the foundation of absolute loyalty and unbreakable contracts. 8 years ago, your daughter saved my life. She walked into a raging chemical fire to pull me from the rubble of Sterling Plaza." Richard stepped around the table, closing the distance between himself and my father. Marcus's confident smirk began to waver, slipping into genuine uncertainty. "And how did you repay her heroism?" Richard continued, his voice echoing off the mahogany walls. "You hid her away. You erased her from your country club narrative because you were ashamed that she wore heavy boots instead of designer heels. You called her a floor cleaner tonight because you could not stomach the reality that she is 10 times the leader you will ever be." Marcus puffed out his chest, attempting to maintain his false bravado. "That is family business, Richard. It has absolutely nothing to do with this contract. We have a legally binding agreement." "It has everything to do with this contract," Richard shot back, his voice finally cracking like a whip. "Because you did not just hide her, Marcus. You forged her signature to secure a $2 million federal business loan. You actively blackmailed her. You attempted to extort my family tonight for $500,000 just to cover your daughter's catering bill. Vivian gasped, clapping her hands over her mouth. She looked wildly around the room, realizing that the entire Buckhead elite was currently witnessing their absolute financial and moral ruin. Camille, still kneeling on the floor without her engagement ring, let out another pathetic sob, completely ignored by everyone. "We had an agreement!" Marcus shouted, his voice pitching higher in pure panic. He waved his copy of the contract frantically. "You signed the preliminary intent. You owe me $10 million. Richard Sterling looked at the piece of paper in his hands. He did not blink. He grabbed the top edge of the preliminary contract and ripped it cleanly in half. "This guarantee is void, due to systemic financial fraud," Richard stated, dropping the torn pieces of paper directly onto the floor at Marcus's feet. "My legal team filed the injunction exactly 30 minutes ago, immediately after Julian confronted Camille about her personal trainer. I am not bailing out a sinking ship, Marcus. I am letting it drown." Marcus stared at the torn pieces of paper on the imported rug. His breathing became rapid and shallow, the color drained from his face entirely. The $10 million bailout was gone. His massive real estate firm was completely bankrupt. I held the primary deeds to every single defaulted mortgage and toxic loan he possessed. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He was totally, completely ruined. Marcus suddenly grabbed his chest, his face contorting into a mask of extreme agony. He let out a loud, theatrical groan and stumbled backward, knocking over a chair before collapsing heavily onto the floor. Vivian shrieked, throwing herself down beside him, dramatically screaming for someone to call an ambulance. "My husband is having a heart attack," she wailed, pointing an accusing finger directly at me and Richard. "You did this to him. You literally killed him over a piece of paper." Several guests pulled out their phones, dialing emergency services, while Julian's security team immediately cleared a path through the dining room. I stood perfectly still, watching my father clutch his chest and groan. I had spent my entire career managing genuine life-threatening medical emergencies. I knew what cardiac arrest looked like. Marcus's color was perfectly fine. His breathing was rapid but regular. He was not having a heart attack. I was having a panic attack induced by catastrophic financial failure, masked as a medical emergency to escape the humiliation of the room. I did not rush to his side. I did not offer any comfort. I simply checked my watch. Right on cue. The wail of approaching sirens pierced the quiet night air outside the restaurant. The flashing red and blue lights illuminated the frosted glass windows of the banquet hall. Vivian looked up, tears streaming down her face, a triumphant sneer forming through her fake distress. "The paramedics are here," she announced to the room, casting a venomous glare in my direction. "They will save him. And when they do, I am suing both of you for attempted murder." The heavy oak doors of the restaurant burst open. Two emergency medical technicians rushed into the room carrying a trauma kit. They immediately knelt beside Marcus, quickly assessing his vitals, checking his pulse, and preparing an oxygen mask. Vivian hovered over them, sobbing loudly, ensuring every guest in the room witnessed her profound suffering. However, the paramedics were not the only ones who had arrived. Following right behind the medical team, 3 uniformed police officers stepped into the private dining room. They did not look frantic. They looked highly organized and completely determined. The lead officer, a tall, imposing man with a stern expression, scanned the room quickly. He completely bypassed Marcus, who was currently being diagnosed by the paramedics with severe acid reflux and acute heartburn. The officer did not look at Vivian. He did not look at me. He walked straight past the head table, ignoring the chaotic medical scene entirely. He stopped directly in front of Camille, who was still sitting on the floor weeping over her lost billionaire future. Camille looked up at the officer, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. "Officer," Camille whimpered, pointing a shaky finger at Julian. "You have to help me. They are trying to ruin my wedding. My father is dying on the floor." The officer did not offer a comforting hand. He reached down to his duty belt and unclipped a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. The metallic click echoed sharply in the silent room. "We are not here for your father," the officer stated, his voice booming with absolute authority. "We are here for your personal trainer, Michael. We just arrested him in the parking lot. He had a brand new Porsche, and a forged medical license in his possession. We are detaining him for medical fraud and extortion. Camille's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. The fake pregnancy, the bribes, the extortion, it was all unraveling at the exact same moment. And as for you, the officer continued, looking down at my sister with zero sympathy. You are coming with us for questioning. Camille scrambled backward on the imported rug, staring at the police officer as if he held a loaded weapon. Her hands flew from her flat stomach to her perfectly contoured face, smudging the expensive foundation she had meticulously applied just hours ago. I am not going anywhere with you, Camille shrieked, her voice cracking into a shrill, hysterical pitch. You cannot arrest me. I am marrying Julian Sterling. I am part of a billionaire family. You have absolutely no right to detain me. The lead officer did not even blink at her pathetic display of entitlement. He hooked his thumbs into his duty belt and looked down at her with an expression of profound boredom. You are not marrying anyone tonight, the officer stated, his voice carrying effortlessly across the dead silent dining room. And you are certainly not part of the Sterling family. Your personal trainer is currently sitting in the back of my cruiser by the valet stand. He folded the second we showed him the surveillance photos. He gave up the entire extortion scheme just to save himself from a maximum sentence. We also have the clinic nurse in custody. She handed over the fraudulent medical records and the cash bribe you gave her. Your fake pregnancy is federal evidence now. Stand up. Camille turned her wild, panicked eyes toward the head table. She looked at Vivian and Marcus, silently begging them to unleash their usual wealthy outrage and shield her from the consequences of her actions. But her parents were entirely paralyzed. Marcus was still clutching his chest, staring blankly at the torn pieces of the $10 million contract scattered on the floor. Vivian was too consumed by the horrifying reality of her own impending homelessness to throw a lifeline to her favorite child. The golden shield they had always provided for Camille had completely evaporated. When her parents did not move a single muscle, Camille turned her desperate gaze toward Julian. He was her last remaining hope. Julian stood near the bar, adjusting the cuffs of his custom tuxedo with deliberate, icy precision. He did not look angry. He looked completely and utterly detached. He raised two fingers, giving a silent, subtle signal to the head of his private security detail. Two massive men in dark suits immediately stepped out from the shadows of the banquet hall. They bypassed the police officers and grabbed Camille firmly by her upper arms. She let out a piercing scream, kicking her designer heels against the floorboards as they hauled her upward. Let me go, Camille wailed, her custom white silk pantsuit tearing slightly at the shoulder seam as she fought against their iron grip. Julian, please, you love me. You cannot let them treat me like a common criminal. Julian did not say a single word. He did not even look at her. The security team marched Camille forcefully through the grand mahogany doors, dragging her out of the private dining room and straight through the main restaurant. Elite patrons dining at the front tables gasped in shock, lowering their silver forks to watch the disgraced socialite being physically removed from the premises. I stood near the large bay windows of the private room, watching the scene unfold on the street outside. The security team dumped Camille unceremoniously onto the concrete curb right next to the valet stand. She stumbled, falling hard onto her knees, scraping her manicured hands against the rough pavement. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser illuminated her tear-streaked face. A moment later, the massive front doors of the restaurant opened again. Richard and Julian Sterling walked out, flanked by their corporate entourage. They strode straight past Camille, not giving her a single passing glance. They stepped into their waiting fleet of armored black SUVs. The heavy doors slammed shut in unison, and the vehicles pulled smoothly away from the curb, leaving Camille sobbing hysterically in a cloud of exhaust fumes, while the police officers moved in to read her rights. Back inside the private dining room, the dust had not even begun to settle before a new sound pierced the heavy tension. It started as a single sharp chime, then another, then a rapid, unrelenting barrage of electronic rings and notification alerts. The noise was coming directly from Marcus's jacket pocket. The Buckhead elite are nothing if not incredibly efficient gossips. The guests sitting at the banquet tables had been quietly texting under the tablecloths since the moment the projector screen dropped down. Word of Richard Sterling tearing up the massive business guarantee had already reached the highest echelons of the Atlanta financial district. Marcus pulled his phone out with trembling hands. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of incoming messages and missed calls. He opened the first text from his primary corporate backer. It read simply, "We are pulling our funding effective immediately. Do not contact this office again." Before Marcus could even process the words, a phone call came through from his country club partner. Marcus answered it on speaker by accident, his fingers slick with cold sweat. "I need my initial investment back right now," the voice on the other end barked aggressively. "I just heard the Sterlings cut you off. You are toxic waste, Marcus. Wire my money by morning or I am suing you for corporate negligence." Marcus dropped the phone. It hit the floor, the glass screen shattering into a spiderweb of cracks, perfectly mirroring the total destruction of his real estate empire. His remaining investors, his country club friends, his golf partners, everyone was pulling their funds simultaneously. The financial collapse was not pending anymore. It was happening in real time right in front of my eyes. His company was dead. His reputation was pulverized. Vivian stared at the shattered phone on the floor. The absolute reality of their destruction finally breached her thick wall of denial. The Buckhead estate was foreclosed. The business was bankrupt. Her golden child was being loaded into the back of a police cruiser. Her elite friends were currently blocking her number. She had absolutely nothing left in this world. Vivian slowly turned her head and looked at me. The arrogant, condescending matriarch who had commanded the room just an hour ago was entirely gone. In her place was a terrified, destitute woman staring down the barrel of extreme poverty. The shift in her demeanor was instantaneous and entirely sickening. She lunged forward not to attack me, but to drop her entire body weight onto the floor right at my feet. The impact tore her expensive silk stockings, scraping her knees against the rough carpet. She threw her arms out, wrapping her hands desperately around my ankles, clinging to my pant legs like a drowning sailor grabbing a piece of driftwood. "Tessa," Vivian sobbed, her voice a pathetic, gravelly wheeze. "Tessa, please. You are our blood. You have to let us stay at your house. You are a CEO. You cannot let your parents live on the streets." I looked down at the woman kneeling on the floor at my feet. Vivian's designer silk stockings were soaking up the dark red wine that had spilled from Julian's glass earlier, staining the expensive fabric a deep bruised purple. The shattered pieces of Marcus's cell phone lay scattered just inches from her trembling hands. The grand matriarch of Buckhead society, the woman who had spent her entire adult life orchestrating ruthless social climbing and maintaining an illusion of flawless wealth, was completely undone. She was clutching the hem of my tailored trousers, sobbing with a raw, ugly desperation that echoed off the mahogany walls of the private dining room. The remaining elite guests, who had not already fled the restaurant, watched in stunned, uncomfortable silence. Waitstaff hovered near the kitchen doors, unsure if they should intervene or look away. I did not step back, and I did not reach down to help her up. I stood perfectly still, letting her feel the cold, hard reality of the floor she was currently kneeling on. "Please, Tessa," Vivian begged, her voice cracking as mascara ran down her cheeks in dark, messy streaks. "We made mistakes. I know we made mistakes. But we are family. We are your flesh and blood. You cannot just abandon us to the streets. You have a massive house. You have $1 billion company. You have enough money to save us, and you would not even notice it was gone." I looked at her tear-stained face, searching for a single ounce of genuine remorse. There was none. There was only panic. She was not apologizing for forging my signature on a $2 million federal loan. She was not apologizing for trying to extort Richard Sterling or for aiding Camille in a grotesque medical fraud. She was simply terrified of losing her country club membership and having to sleep in a homeless shelter. "You told me a floor cleaner did not belong at a family table," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, icy register that forced her to stop crying and listen. "You stood right there on the grand staircase at the engagement party and announced to hundreds of people that I was garbage because I worked with my hands. You were right, Vivian. I do not belong at your table, and you certainly do not belong at mine." Marcus pushed himself up from the floor where he had been faking his heart attack. His custom Italian suit was rumpled, his tie skewed, and his face a mottled, unhealthy shade of gray. He stumbled toward us, his arrogance completely shattered, but his sense of entitlement still desperately clinging to life. "You cannot do this," Marcus croaked, pointing a shaking finger at me. I am your father. I gave you love. The courts will not let you throw us out onto the street without a dime. We will sue you for elder abuse. We will go to the press and tell them how the CEO of Vanguard Recovery treats her own parents. I laughed, a short, sharp sound, devoid of any humor. You do not have a lawyer, Marcus, because you do not have a retainer fee. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your credit cards are declined. Your investors just pulled every single cent of their backing. And as for the press, the local news anchors are currently outside interviewing the police officers who just arrested your future son-in-law for federal extortion. By tomorrow morning, the entire city of Atlanta will know that the Marcus real estate empire was nothing but a fraudulent house of cards built on forged signatures and fake pregnancies. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The absolute finality of his destruction finally crushed the breath from his lungs. He sank into a dining chair, burying his face in his hands, completely defeated. Vivian tightened her grip on my pants, her fake nails digging into the fabric. Tessa, I am begging you, give us a loan. Just enough to get an apartment, just enough to eat. We have absolutely nothing left. I gently but firmly pulled my leg free from her grasp, taking a deliberate step backward. I refuse to give you a single dime of my money, I stated clearly, watching the last flicker of hope die in her eyes. I will not enable the people who actively tried to destroy my life. Vivian let out a pathetic wail, slumping forward onto the wine-soaked rug. But before she could launch into another theatrical tantrum, I offered a cold, calculated smile. However, I continued my tone, shifting to the brisk professional cadence I used with my federal contractors. Vanguard Recovery is always hiring. If you genuinely need a roof over your head and food to eat, you are welcome to apply for a position. Come to my corporate headquarters tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock sharp. Do not be late. Vivian slowly raised her head from the floor, her eyes widening in absolute horror as the implication of my words washed over her. You want me to work for you? She gasped, the very idea deeply offensive to her aristocratic sensibilities. You want me to get a job? I want you to pay off the $8.5 million debt you owe me, I corrected smoothly. And since you have no liquid assets, you will pay it off with manual labor. It is a very simple, legally binding arrangement. Marcus looked up from his hands, his expression twisted with indignation. We are executives, Tessa. We are business owners. We do not do manual labor. You are bankrupt frauds, I shot back, slicing through his lingering delusion. And tomorrow morning you are going to put on a pair of rubber gloves and learn exactly what it takes to clean up a mess. You have 24 hours before the federal marshals arrive at the Buckhead estate to execute the foreclosure. I suggest you spend that time packing sensible shoes. I did not wait for their response. I turned my back on the people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. I adjusted the cuffs of my tailored suit jacket, picked up my briefcase, and walked purposefully toward the grand exit of the private dining room. I did not look over my shoulder as the heavy mahogany doors swung shut behind me. I stepped out into the cool Atlanta night, leaving my bankrupt parents and sobbing sister sitting in the ruins of their shattered social facade. The sun rose over Atlanta, casting a bright, unforgiving light across the elite manicured lawns of Buckhead. Today was supposed to be the absolute pinnacle of my mother's social climbing career. Today was the day Camille was meant to walk down an aisle covered in imported white orchids, permanently fusing our bloodline with the Sterling real estate empire. Instead, the only vehicles pulling up to the massive iron gates of my parents' estate did not belong to a luxury bridal concierge. They belonged to the United States Marshals Service, accompanied by a fleet of heavy-duty moving trucks dispatched directly by my legal team. Marcus and Vivian were jolted awake, not by the gentle chimes of wedding planners, but by the heavy authoritative pounding of law enforcement on their custom mahogany front doors. The foreclosure I had initiated the previous afternoon was executed with ruthless militaristic precision. My legal team had utilized a specific accelerated commercial default clause that Marcus himself had foolishly signed when he took out his third highly predatory mortgage. I thought he was outsmarting a desperate lender. He never imagined that lender would eventually be his own daughter. Within minutes, the pristine illusion of their Buckhead royalty was physically dismantled. Federal marshals marched into the grand foyer, handing Marcus the final eviction notice. Vivian ran down the sweeping spiral staircase in a silk sleeping robe, screaming that there had been a terrible mistake. She demanded to call her lawyers. The marshals coldly informed her that her legal representation had officially dropped her as a client at midnight due to non-payment. Camille trudged out of her childhood bedroom, looking absolutely destroyed. After the police finished questioning her about the medical extortion ring last night, they had released her pending formal federal charges. With her luxury downtown apartment, already flagged by the authorities, and her billionaire fiancé gone, she had been forced to crawl back to her parents' house in the middle of the night. Now, on the morning she was supposed to be fitted for her custom wedding veil, she was being ordered to vacate the premises immediately. The marshals gave them exactly 15 minutes to gather whatever essential clothing they could fit into a single bag each. Everything else, the antique furniture, the priceless art, the expensive jewelry, Vivian hoarded like trophies, belonged to the estate, and the estate belonged to me. They were marched out the front doors and forced onto the sidewalk, just as the morning commuter traffic began to flow through the exclusive neighborhood. The humiliation was absolute and instantaneous. Vivian tried to hide her face behind a pair of oversized sunglasses, but it was useless. As they stood shivering on the curb, two massive heavy-duty tow trucks backed aggressively into the circular driveway. The repo men did not care about the neighborhood noise ordinances. They hooked up Marcus's prized Mercedes-Benz and Vivian's brand-new Range Rover, hoisting the luxury vehicles into the air. Marcus scrambled onto the manicured grass, waving his arms frantically at the tow truck drivers. He shouted that the cars were leased under his corporate account and could not be seized. The repo man simply rolled down his window and handed Marcus a printed notice. The corporate account was entirely bankrupt. The vehicles were being repossessed to cover the massive outstanding debt he owed to Vanguard Recovery. My father watched in total, helpless silence as the physical symbols of his masculine pride were towed away down the street. Vivian pulled out her cell phone, her hands shaking violently. She desperately started dialing the numbers of her closest country club friends. She called the women who had happily drank her expensive champagne and attended her lavish parties for the past decade. She planned to ask for a temporary place to stay, just a guest house or a spare room, until Marcus could supposedly sort out this massive clerical error. The first friend sent the call straight to voicemail. The second answered, but the moment Vivian mentioned needing a place to stay, the woman abruptly claimed she was entering a tunnel and hung up. The third friend was brutally honest. She told Vivian that the entire Buckhead social registry had seen the viral video of Camille's fake pregnancy and the subsequent police raid at the restaurant. Nobody in their elite, image-obsessed circle was going to risk their own social standing by associating with a family currently under federal investigation for fraud and extortion. Vivian lowered the phone, the devastating reality finally setting in. They were complete and utter pariahs, with no cars, no credit cards, and zero cash in their pockets. They could not even order a rideshare service to take them to a cheap motel. Camille sank onto her single duffel bag right there on the concrete sidewalk, burying her face in her hands and sobbing loudly. She wailed about how she was supposed to be drinking mimosas in a bridal suite right now. Marcus paced back and forth, muttering aggressively to himself, trying to calculate a way out of a maze that had no exits. Vivian looked down the long, sweeping street of the neighborhood she used to rule. She knew they had exactly one option left to avoid walking into a crowded public homeless shelter in the middle of Atlanta. She swallowed the massive, suffocating lump of pride in her throat. She grabbed Camille by the arm, yanking her up from the pavement, and barked at Marcus to grab his bag. The three former elites of Atlanta high society walked 2 miles down the road in their wrinkled clothes, dragging their bags behind them until they reached a public bus stop. They pooled the spare change they found at the bottom of Vivian's purse, just to afford the fare. They sat in absolute humiliating silence on the crowded city transit, riding the bus all the way into the bustling downtown financial district. The bus hissed to a halt. The doors swung open. Marcus, Vivian, and Camille stepped out onto the busy pavement. They slowly raised their heads, looking up at the towering 20-story glass and steel high-rise reflecting the morning sun. The massive chrome letters of Vanguard Recovery gleamed down at them. They stood completely defeated in the shadow of the empire built by the daughter they had thrown away. They walked through the revolving glass doors of Vanguard Recovery, dragging their meager duffel bags across the pristine white marble floors of the main atrium. After being thrown out of their Buckhead mansion by federal marshals and riding a public city bus, the toxic delusion of the Atlanta elite still poisoned their minds. Marcus straightened his wrinkled Italian suit jacket, clearing his throat as he looked around the bustling high-tech corporate lobby. He convinced himself and his wife that I was simply making them beg before handing over executive vice president titles. They reasoned that the chief executive officer of a federal contracting firm could not possibly afford the public relations nightmare of her immediate family living on the streets. Camille sniffled, wiping her ruined makeup with the back of her hand. She was already planning how she would decorate her new corner office and which corporate credit card she would demand to replace the billionaire lifestyle she had just lost. They approached the massive granite reception desk, with their chins tilted upward, still desperately clinging to the ghost of their shattered social status. "I am Marcus, the father of your chief executive officer," Marcus announced to the receptionist, attempting to project his old booming country club authority. "This building belongs to my daughter, and by extension, it belongs to the family that built her from the ground up. Tell Tessa we are here to accept her employment offer. We will need 3 temporary executive suites on the top floor and a corporate housing stipend arranged immediately." The receptionist did not bat an eye. She maintained a mask of total corporate indifference, refusing to acknowledge his ridiculous demands. She did not reach for a telephone or offer a sympathetic smile. She simply pressed a silent button under her console. A moment later, my head of human resources stepped out from a set of frosted glass doors. He did not offer a warm corporate greeting. He did not ask a security guard to take their bags. He walked straight to the granite counter and slapped 3 incredibly thick, heavy industrial employment contracts onto the surface. He slid a cheap blue ballpoint pen right on top of the stack. Marcus looked down at the standard issue employee agreements, his brow furrowing in deep, offended confusion. "What is this garbage?" he demanded, pushing the paperwork aggressively back across the counter. "I am a seasoned commercial real estate broker. My wife is a premier socialite in this city. We do not fill out standard onboarding forms like common-day laborers. Bring me the executive compensation packages. I expect a base salary of at least $200,000 a year if I am going to bring my elite expertise to this firm." Camille leaned against the desk, rubbing her forehead. "Just give us the keys to a corporate apartment," she whined. "Right now, I am far too exhausted to read legal jargon today." The head of human resources did not blink. He pointed a steady, uncompromising finger at the dotted line on the bottom page. "You are not receiving an executive compensation package," he stated in a flat, clinical tone. "You are receiving the standard entry-level independent contractor agreement for hazardous site sanitation. Sign the documents or vacate the lobby immediately. We have a strict loitering policy." Vivian slammed her hand against the granite desk, her shrill voice echoing off the high ceilings and drawing the attention of passing employees. "How dare you speak to the mother of this company like that?" she shrieked, looking around wildly. "Tessa. Tessa, get down here right now and discipline your staff. I demand respect." I did not need to be summoned. I was already standing on the glass mezzanine above them, looking down at the pathetic display of their broken pride. I slowly descended the floating glass staircase. The heavy combat boots I wore echoed sharply against the glass steps, a rhythm that signaled the absolute end of their reign. I was not wearing my tailored navy blazer or my expensive silk blouse anymore. I wore a simple, functional black tactical uniform, the exact heavy-duty gear I wore when overseeing active federal disaster zones. I did not hold a customized leather folder or a settlement check. I carried something much heavier. When I reached the bottom step, I walked directly up to my parents and my golden child sister. I did not say a single word of greeting. I did not gloat or raise my voice. I simply raised my hands and tossed 3 pairs of thick industrial-grade rubber gloves and 3 heavy yellow hazmat cleaning buckets directly at their feet. The thick plastic clattered loudly against the pristine marble floor, the sound echoing through the atrium and shattering the very last remnants of their wealthy delusions. Camille stared down at the bright yellow buckets, her eyes wide with unadulterated horror. She looked at her perfectly manicured hands, the same hands she used to hold champagne flutes and fake ultrasound photos, then back up at my face. "You cannot be serious," Camille whispered, her voice trembling with raw panic as she stumbled backward. "You expect us to clean up trash. You expect me to scrub floors. This is sick. You are trying to humiliate us in front of your employees because you are a cruel, heartless monster." "You owe me $8.5 million," I said smoothly, my voice carrying the absolute uncompromising weight of a federal judge passing sentence. "You built your entire fake empire by exploiting my labor, forging my signature, and lying to everyone in this city. Your free ride is permanently over. And since you forged a $2 million federal document to fund your fake lifestyle, the police are currently waiting for my call. You have two choices today. You can either go to federal prison before lunch, or you can put on these uniforms and start working off your massive debt at the state minimum wage." The silence in the atrium stretched until it became physically suffocating. Marcus looked at the yellow bucket at his feet, then at the heavy gray janitorial jumpsuit draped over the front desk. His mouth opened and closed, but the arrogant country club bluster he had relied on for decades had completely vanished. Vivian stared at her trembling manicured hands. The reality of her situation finally breached the thick walls of her delusion. They had absolutely zero leverage left. If they walked out of those revolving glass doors, they would be sleeping on the concrete sidewalks of downtown Atlanta, and by nightfall, the federal authorities would be arresting them for a $2 million forgery. Camille let out a single pathetic sob, realizing her billionaire fairy tale was entirely dead and buried. "Pick up the uniforms," I commanded, my voice slicing through the quiet lobby with absolute authority. "The shift starts in exactly 10 minutes. Defeated, utterly stripped of their elite buckhead armor, my parents and sister bent down. Marcus picked up the gray jumpsuit first, his hands shaking with deep, unadulterated shame. Vivian followed, her tears falling silently onto the heavy canvas fabric. Camille picked up the thick industrial rubber gloves, holding them as if they were covered in acid. My head of human resources gestured toward the locker rooms down the hall, instructing them to change and report immediately back to the main atrium. 15 minutes later, the transformation was complete, and the poetic justice was absolute. The grand matriarch and patriarch of Atlanta high society emerged from the locker rooms, wearing ill-fitting gray janitorial jumpsuits. Vivian had to tie her hair back with a cheap rubber band. Marcus wore heavy slip-resistant work boots instead of his custom Italian leather shoes. Camille stumbled out behind them. She had spent her entire life manicuring her hands and weaponizing her appearance to secure a wealthy husband. Now she was forcefully shoving her arms up to the elbows into thick, bright yellow rubber gloves. Their very first assignment was the grand marble lobby, the same floor they had confidently marched across just an hour ago, demanding executive corner offices. My building manager handed Marcus an industrial mop. He handed Vivian a heavy bucket of soapy water. He handed Camille a scrub brush and a bottle of heavy-duty grout cleaner. "You missed a spot over there," the building manager said dryly, pointing to the exact place where Vivian had been standing when she demanded my security team stand down. Marcus gripped the wooden handle of the mop. His knuckles turned white. He pushed the wet mop across the marble, his face burning bright red as the morning rush of Vanguard recovery employees began to flood into the building. Dozens of highly paid federal contractors, elite crisis managers, and administrative staff walked through the revolving doors. They carried briefcases and fresh coffees. They walked right past Marcus, tracking faint footprints across the floor he had just wiped. Vivian dropped to her knees, scrubbing the baseboards while trying to hide her face behind her shoulder. Camille knelt beside her, choking back humiliating sobs as she scrubbed the grout, forced to do exactly what she had ruthlessly shamed me for doing at her engagement party. They were the family failure now. They were the ones cleaning up the mess. I did not stay in the lobby to gloat. True power does not need to hover. I turned my back on them and walked into my private elevator, pressing the button for the top floor. I stepped into my lavish corner office. The walls were lined with dark mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline. The morning sun illuminated the city I was actively helping to protect and rebuild. I walked over to my massive desk and sat down in my high-backed leather chair. I took a deep, steadying breath. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood, the constant need to prove my worth to people who were determined to misunderstand me, was completely gone. I was entirely free. The heavy oak doors of my office swung open. Richard Sterling and his son Julian walked in. The billionaire real estate mogul and the heir to his massive empire did not look like men who had just survived a highly publicized scandal. They looked relieved, energized, and ready for business. Julian carried a tray with 3 fresh artisanal coffees. He set them down on my desk, his pale blue eyes bright and entirely clear. He looked like a man who had just dodged a massive, devastating bullet. He was completely free of his toxic relationship, no longer trapped by a manipulative liar and her fraudulent pregnancy. "We come bearing gifts," Richard said, his deep voice carrying a tone of profound respect. Richard reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick, beautifully bound legal document. He slid it across my mahogany desk. It was not a fake ultrasound or a forged loan agreement. It was a massive, highly lucrative federal contract. "The state just approved the emergency infrastructure overhaul," Richard explained, taking a seat opposite my desk. "The Sterling Empire is heading the development, but we need the absolute best hazardous materials team in the country to clear the foundation sites safely. We want Vanguard Recovery as our primary federal contractor." I looked down at the multi-million-dollar contract, then up at the 2 men who valued my actual expertise over superficial social standing. I picked up my favorite customized gold pen, the one I bought myself after securing my very first solo contract, and signed my name on the dotted line with absolute confidence. I picked up my fresh coffee and walked over to the center of my office. Right in the middle of the room, incorporated into the modern architectural design, was a thick, reinforced glass floor panel that looked directly down into the main atrium 20 stories below. Julian stepped up beside me, looking down through the glass. Far below, 3 tiny figures in gray jumpsuits were on their hands and knees pushing yellow buckets across the gleaming white marble. They were scrubbing the floors of my empire, working off their massive debt 1 minimum wage hour at a time. Julian let out a quiet, disbelieving laugh, shaking his head at the sheer magnitude of the karma unfolding below us. I did not laugh. I just watched them work. I took a slow, satisfying sip of my hot coffee, feeling perfectly, completely content. Never treat the person cleaning the floors like garbage. One day, they might just be the one to clean out your entire life. The greatest lesson from this journey is that your worth is never defined by those committed to misunderstanding you. When toxic family members try to tear you down or force you into a lesser role, walking away isn't a sign of weakness, it is the ultimate act of self-preservation. True success isn't about petty revenge. It is about building a life so authentic, independent, and fulfilling that their bitter opinions no longer matter. You have the absolute power to build your own table when you are denied a seat at theirs. Blood makes you related, but respect, loyalty, and healthy boundaries are what make a true family. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic relatives to protect your own peace? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more empowering stories of resilience.